December, end of the year is coming. A few of us got together, we talked about some of the bigger trends in security for the year, what happened, what we talked about, and some of the things that were just kind of unavoidable this year. So here we are, December. The year is closing up. Maybe a good time to take a look at some of the bigger stories in cybersecurity for the year. So anything strike you from the year, looking back at all the stuff we covered and all the things that happened?
Cloud security. It was an interesting year for cloud security. And what was interesting this year is that people were putting data into the cloud. The cloud platform itself, I think, was operating as designed, but because they didn't put additional controls to protect that data, we saw repeated occurrences, different industries, different types of data, but where the data wasn't locked down and it was accessible, somebody on the internet was able to get to their bucket of data and capture the data, and there it leaked. So cloud leakage, but not because of a weakness in the cloud platform, more of a user administrator error that allowed it to be open to the world.
It's almost like the same thing we see with the IoT devices, where people plug in their IoT device and think they're done. Well, same thing in these public clouds. Definitely a new vector. I know we're not doing predictions yet, but I would think this is something that's really it's only gonna get worse before it gets better. So good observation. Todd, what do you think about this area?
Most organizations, as you said, able to put the data out there. The cloud is secure, right? It's got some sort of a certification from some certifying body, but they don't realize that they need to take the same precautions as they would in putting that data in data centers or inside of their environment, right? Knowing what data they have, what the criticality of that data is, the sensitivity, and then putting the right controls around it.
How about you, Joe? What did you want to highlight?
I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about WannaCry and NotPetya, all those variants. We had Mirai last year. This year, I think the headlines were rampant with WannaCry, and right after WannaCry, we had Petya, and it was a significant battle for folks in our industry that these wormable bugs, or however you want to describe them, the botnet related wormable activity that really was, you'd see it would take down full IT departments or full companies. I think I saw a funny picture when it happened that there was a sign out in the lobby of one of these companies that said, "Don't turn your computer on." Like people didn't know how to handle it because it was, any machine connecting to the network was worming its way through. So I think, as terms of reviewing what was really in the news and really hitting us hard this year, WannaCry was definitely top of the list.
If you compare this to other worms, I think there's some similarities.
Right.
If you had been patched, you should have been okay through this, right? There were multiple vulnerabilities, I think, that were in the same release, same patch would have patched.
Right, which is another thing I think we saw this year. Years past, we were used to, one vulnerability for one threat. Now we're seeing these threats that are, multiple vectors. They're kind of harvesting threat vectors, and then I can look for 5 different vulnerabilities and then worm my way through. So,
and the other thing that was different about this than previous worms is that, at least initially, there was also a ransomware component that was then turned off, right?
It was an interesting story. It almost played out like a TV show. Like the random hacker found the way to block the ransomware by registering the domain, and then now we still have to deal with the wormable botnet activity. So, Todd, how about you? What major trend did you see in 2017, or something that hit you from reviewing the year?
One thing that I found of interest is, we talk about IoT and big attacks, and certainly we've had our share of those, but I thought it was interesting there was an attack on online gaming environments through common gaming consoles that people might have in their house, right? 2.5 million records compromised. And so we start thinking about all these different devices that are connected, right? IoT and what information are on those. Most people will say, hey, it's my baby monitor, those types of things. But with these types of accounts being compromised, you start getting perhaps some email addresses, obviously, and passwords and those types of things. So I wouldn't be surprised if at some point, we're not making predictions, I get that, but at some point these are, some sort of an entry vector for more advanced attacks down the road.
I have heard some people say that this year was the year of the IoT botnet, but it seems like it started late 16, right? So it had already started happening, and it just kept happening.
We heard about it in 2016. We had nothing slowed down. We see variants. I know we talked about the Perserai botnet at one point this year, which was a variant of Mirai. But I think if anything, it's that the IoT botnet activity didn't go away, and now we just sort of accept it as a given, But here we are, Christmas season, and the top 10 gifts this year are home automation, IoT devices. So it's only going to explode more probably.
I think in the data there was this giant mountain of scanning traffic, trying to find everything that has Telnet open and compromise those devices if they have a default password or weak configuration or aren't patched. Kind of after that mountain, the activity continued, but maybe some new ports were being used. I think there's 2323 instead of just 23. So people are like, oh, that's an alternate Telnet port. Let's scan for the alternate Telnet port.
Yeah, we also covered this year, we covered how these IoT devices are so in demand that the minute they turn off and turn back on, they're being recruited by multiple botnets. So it's a whole ecosystem of this activity. So
I think there's also a connection between IoT devices getting compromised and installing mining software for cryptocurrency. I think early on that was one of the things we saw. It was like, well, what malware did they stick on it? It was like, well, they're trying to earn a coin, right?
Right.
And I think there's a connection between a lot of the scanning activity that we saw. Some of it, like, well, what is that? Well, it looks like IoT. And some of it was even looking for the wallets that the coins are stored in case those were poorly protected with a weak password or some default configuration that would let you have access to the wallet and take a coin that someone else had harvested on the internet.
Cryptocurrency, another major trend from the year. The explosion of cryptocurrency and threats associated with it. I think I saw a story, I don't remember the numbers, but just the amount of electricity that's being used mining cryptocurrency, it's disastrous if it continues at this rate. They said that we'll have used all the power by 2020 or some crazy number with the amount of power that's being used to mine cryptocurrency. So, all right, well, I think that's a good discussion. It was a crazy year, and I'm sure next year will be more of the same. So, thanks, guys. When you think about trends in the year in review, it always strikes me that the bigger the story, maybe the more awareness we're getting to some of these issues. Maybe we'll see people protecting themselves a little better, maybe listening to some of the recommendations from security experts.
The problems that we saw in 2016, a lot of them continued in 2017. There were no easy solutions, there were no magic bullets to make a lot of that stuff go away. A lot of the things that happened in 2017, we expected to see, IoT devices being involved in security issues. We also expected cryptocurrency to be a big deal this year, and it was. So before 2017 even began, some of our experts in security predicted what they saw as the most likely things to occur. So Todd, you were one of those folks from our team who made some bold predictions for 2017. And I think what we're going to do now is kind of look at all the predictions, including yours, and then we'll discuss whether we did see that happen and give you a letter grade, just like the teacher used to, on how good of a prediction that was.
Excellent. So let's start off. At the beginning of 2017, there was a lot of hype around real news, fake news, those types of things. So Stan predicted that we would see expanded stories on sort of fake news, if you will, in security.
Working with Stan and John and these security analysts, whenever we see something, a lot of the stories come out and they attribute it to a certain country. And our security analysts, they always say, I'll believe it when I see it. They want to dig into the data, reverse the malware, see what they really see. So I think this is pretty valid. I think specifically back to the IoT Reaper, which, news stories came out about this IoT Reaper, and it was supposed to change everything. It was going to be, bigger than Mirai. And then a few days later, you sprinkle in a story about, IoT Reaper not quite as big as people had projected. And even on our show, when we talked about it, John Hogaboom was like, I'm not seeing it, And so I think, from John and Stan and Matt and Manny, from their perspective, I think this is the type of area where they know what they're looking at. And
that was the one that the headline said Doomsday, right?
Yeah.
It had a bunch of exploits. People must have thought it was going to have destructive malware in it, maybe brick a bunch of machines.
The size of it, the projected volume was it was I forget the numbers, but it was big, and it didn't end up being nearly the size of what was expected. So What do you guys think for a grade for Stan's prediction?
So I'll say that I think Stan and the team have more visibility into, that type of information than I think the general security consumer might, right? Because day in and day out, they're living those analytics and they're digging into those and they're making decisions based off the validity of that information. So I think this was a pretty strong one. I'd give it a B.
B. I'm good with the B. Michael?
I'm going to say B minus.
B minus. Well, you always grade up. You grade on the curve, so I say we stick with the B. All right, what's the next one, Todd?
All right, John Huggaboom told us that we would see more IoT headaches in 2017. Pretty good prediction coming off of the stuff we saw at the end of 16 with Mirai, but that was John's prediction.
Not the boldest prediction, right? Based on how crazy this stuff's been for a while, but yeah.
I mean, he's got to get an A, but you just ask, is it a layup or not?
Yeah, right.
No, but yeah, we definitely saw this. It's the port 23 stuff, as you mentioned earlier, that's alternate ports being used for IoT device. Think about the Netis router, right? We always talk about the Netis router. It's been vulnerable for years, and it comes up every few months, and it's just stuff like that is just never going away. So
I think there was this thinking that we would have standards created and maybe a laboratory for the industry, and that consumers wouldn't buy stuff unless it had the proper stamp because it's high risk.
Right.
And I think we're still talking about that. I think that's happened. That didn't happen in 2017.
Right.
But we talked about those same recommendations and ideas. And the other thing I would say, it's not that people aren't doing work in this space to secure those things, is that there's just so many of them and so much diversity in the types of devices and what OS they're running.
There's stacks and stacks of standards for IoT devices depending on the type of communication that device uses, right? There's a lot of different governing bodies that are given direction around that. I think there's lack of a sort of connected standard, if you will, in the terms of pulling that all together and giving us some solid baselines across all devices.
So you think an A for this one, Michael?
Yeah, because there's so much activity, it continued. So
I'll say an A, but we contingent that on the fact that no one's allowed to make this same prediction again. It's too easy.
Fair enough. I'll agree with that.
All right, we'll give him an A. All right, we got another one.
Brian Rexroad predicted that we would see virtual currency being used more creative and through like expanding type of scams. So he was in the virtual currency space.
Well, I think we definitely saw malware that it was ransomware. So
Right.
it was telling you need to pay me, and it would certainly give you the option to pay in cryptocurrency, maybe only in cryptocurrency.
Right.
There were some stories about people asking the question, so how do I get one of these coins in order to pay? People want to be anonymous with the cryptocurrency, but you're only so anonymous, maybe not fully anonymous. So there's the idea, well, maybe if I take this other type of cryptocurrency, it'll be more anonymous than this type of cryptocurrency. But Brian clearly knew that this was what all the attention was about.
Yeah, I mean, I think just thinking about some of the stories we covered this year on, we had Ethereum threats we covered, Monero was covered, and then obviously Bitcoin, which is the leader in the clubhouse. I think this is definitely an area that did explode a little bit in 2017. So I would say Brian was right on.
Yeah, I'd give him an A or an A plus even.
Yeah, well, what I find interesting when he talks about virtual currency used in more creative and expanding scams, if we look at, after Petya, the next variant that came through looked like it was ransomware, right? So, hey, we're trying to leverage virtual currency, but in reality, it was really just destructiveware that was hitting larger organizations, right?
So A plus?
I'm going to give Brian an A plus.
Well, all right, I would agree with that. But unfortunately, hopefully we're not out of A's because now we're down to my prediction. So my prediction was that even though we had movement in the sort of the credit card space, cardholder data space with EMV, that it was pushed out to 2020, and we would continue to see cardholder data fraud throughout 2017. And we don't have end-of-year numbers yet, but if you look at halfway through the year, we'd already seen a 26% increase over the same point in time in 2016 in cardholder data fraud. So hopefully those numbers will hold. I think we'll still be up over 20% plus year-over-year increase in cardholder data fraud.
How did chip and PIN changes affect that? Any idea?
Not much, which is interesting, right? So when we expect full implementation of, let's be honest, chip and X, right? Because now it's signature, not PIN. But when we see full implementations of that, we're going to see it change a little bit more going towards card not present transactions, so online fraud where you can't use the chip. Not a full implementation, and even when it is, in my opinion, it's not a good implementation of the controls that they could put in place. We'll continue to see it.
I'm going to give you an A also, but this is one where as I give you the A, I think, well, I wish I wasn't giving you an A.
Yeah.
I wanted those controls to make a difference. I wanted to feel safer and not to replace my card as often.
I don't think that's something to look forward to because I don't think it's going to happen.
Oh, yeah, I'm good with that. Another A. We gave it a lot of A's, huh? We're the easy teacher. All right. Hopefully, the folks who do the predictions this year will be just as spot on as they were last year. I think the folks from last year's prediction show did pretty well. We ended up with all A's and B's, which would be a good report card if one of my kids brought it home.
Next week on Threat Track, we'll see predictions for 2018. And then a year later, we'll go back and give them grades on how well they did.